was an ordinary afternoon at the park, the kind of day when children's laughter echoed across the playground and parents relaxed on the benches. Manny Pacquiao had chosen this simple spot so his daughter could enjoy some fresh air away from the spotlight. She loved the swings, the slides, and the freedom of being just another child. But peace doesn't always last long. As she skipped across the open space, a small group of kids suddenly surrounded her. Their voices grew sharp, their tone mocking. At first it was teasing words, but then it turned into pushing and shoving. She tried to brush it off, but the circle around her tightened. The joy on her face quickly turned into unease. From a nearby bench, Manny watched with careful eyes. His instincts as both a father and a fighter tensed, but before he could stand, something unexpected happened. A boy, no older than his daughter, stepped forward from the crowd. He was black, slightly smaller than the bullies, but his presence was strong. His voice cut through the noise. "Leave her alone. She didn't do anything to you." The bullies turned on him instantly, their sneers now directed at the boy. "What are you gonna do about it?" One of them jeered, shoving him on the shoulder. But the boy didn't back down. He straightened his posture, clenched his little fists, and stood between Manny's daughter and the troublemakers. "I'm not gonna let you hurt her," he said firmly. His courage was louder than their taunts. Manny's daughter's eyes widened with relief. For the first time in minutes, she felt safe. Not because her father was there, but because someone her own age had chosen to defend her. The scene caught the attention of other parents and kids nearby. Some stopped to watch, whispering to each other, surprised by the boy's boldness. And Manny? He sat still, his heart stirring with a mix of pride and curiosity. Here was a young stranger, risking himself against bigger kids just to protect someone else. What Manny did when he saw this act of courage shocked everyone around the park. The tension in the park thickened. A moment ago, it had been just another afternoon filled with carefree laughter. Now, a quiet crowd began forming around the scene. Curious parents, older kids, and even a jogger who stopped mid-stride. Everyone could sense something unusual was happening. The bullies weren't used to being challenged. Their usual victims either ran away or stayed silent. But this boy, smaller, younger-looking, and outnumbered, wasn't moving an inch. His voice was steady, his eyes locked on the ringleader. "I said, leave her alone," the boy repeated, louder this time. One of the bullies smirked, stepping closer until his shadow loomed over him. "You think you're tough? She doesn't belong here. And neither do you." His words dripped with the kind of prejudice too heavy for children's mouths, words they must have learned from somewhere. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. Manny clenched his jaw, his fists tightening on his knees as he sat on the bench. He wasn't just watching kids argue anymore. This was bigger. It was a reflection of something deeper, uglier. The way people are judged not by who they are, but by how they look. The boy stood taller, his small chest rising with courage. "Everybody belongs here. You don't get to decide that." The bullies laughed, but the crowd didn't. Parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some pulled their children closer, as if wanting to shield them from both the cruelty of the bullies and the bravery that exposed it. One bully shoved the boy again, harder this time. He stumbled back but didn't fall. Manny's daughter reached out, her small hand clutching the boy's sleeve. "Please don't," she whispered, worried he'd get hurt. But the boy shook his head, brushing the dust off his shirt. "I'm not scared of them," he told her gently. Then he faced the bullies again. "You can pick on me if you want, but you won't touch her." The word struck Manny like a thunderbolt. He had spent years in the ring, fighting battles with his fists. Yet here in front of him was a child fighting a different kind of battle, one of principle, one of justice. Bystanders began recording with their phones. Some murmured support. "That kid's brave. He's standing up for what's right." A few parents even stepped forward, ready to intervene if the bullies went too far. Still, Manny remained seated. He wanted to see this moment unfold. He wanted to understand the boy's spirit, the kind of courage that doesn't come from training or fame, but from heart. One bully shoved again, but before things could escalate further, Manny finally stood. His presence alone changed the atmosphere. Conversations hushed. Even the bullies froze, sensing an authority greater than their own childish cruelty. He walked calmly toward the circle, his eyes steady, his steps measured. His daughter's face lit up the moment she saw him, but Manny didn't rush to her side. Instead, he stopped beside the boy, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did a brave thing," Manny said softly, his voice carrying enough strength to quiet the entire park. "It takes courage to stand up when others stay silent." The boy looked up, surprised by the calm respect in Manny's tone. He had expected maybe a scolding for getting involved, but not praise. Manny turned his attention to the bullies, his gaze sharp, yet controlled. "Do you know what real strength looks like?" he asked them. "It's not in pushing people smaller than you. It's not in using cruel words to make yourself feel bigger. Real strength," he paused, tapping the boy's chest lightly, "is in protecting others, in standing up for what's right." The bullies shifted uncomfortably, their arrogance fading under the weight of Manny's words. They didn't yet realize who was speaking to them. To them, he was just a strong, confident man. But his presence was enough to dismantle their swagger. Manny's daughter clung to his arm, relief washing over her. The boy remained steady, though his heart raced. For the first time, he felt the weight of what he had done. He hadn't thought about consequences. He had just acted. The crowd stood in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Parents recorded every second, their cameras capturing not just a confrontation, but a lesson. And Manny? He looked at the boy again, a faint smile forming. He knew this was only the beginning of a moment that would leave everyone in the park, and far beyond, talking for years to come. Have you ever seen someone stand up to a bully, even when it wasn't easy? Comment below and share where you're watching this story from. The bullies stood frozen, unsure how to respond. The crowd's silence pressed against them like a heavy weight. Manny's words still hung in the air, reminding everyone that this was no ordinary moment. The young boy straightened his back, as if Manny's hand on his shoulder had given him invisible armor. Manny's daughter, still holding on to her father's arm, whispered softly, "Papa, he saved me." Her voice trembled, but her eyes glowed with gratitude. Manny bent down slightly, looking at the boy eye to eye. "What's your name, son?" he asked. The boy hesitated, glancing at the group of bullies, then back at Manny. "Jason," he said quietly. "Jason," Manny repeated, his voice warm. "You were brave today. You didn't have to step in, but you did. That's what makes heroes." Jason's cheeks flushed. He didn't feel like a hero. He was just doing what he thought was right. But hearing it from this man, whose presence commanded the attention of an entire park, made his heart pound with pride. The bullies muttered to each other. One of them sneered, "He's not a hero. He's just stupid." But their words lacked conviction. The crowd's disapproving stares burned into them, stripping away their confidence. Manny's eyes hardened for a moment. He turned his attention back to the bullies. "When I was your age," he began, "I was bullied too. Not just by kids, but by life itself. I was poor. I didn't always have food. People looked at me and thought I wasn't worth much." The kids shifted uncomfortably, unused to hearing such honesty from an adult. The parents watching leaned closer, sensing that Manny was about to share something powerful. "But I learned something," he continued. "Strength is not about hurting others. It's about lifting people up. When you push someone down, you only prove your weakness. But when you protect, when you stand for justice," Manny gestured to Jason, "you prove your true strength." The crowd nodded in agreement. A few people even clapped softly, though the tension of the moment kept most in quiet awe. Jason looked at Manny with wide eyes. He didn't know this man's history, but he could feel the weight behind every word. Manny wasn't just talking to the bullies. He was talking to everyone there. The ringleader bully tried to laugh it off. "You're just saying that because he helped your kid." Manny's gaze sharpened. "No, I'm saying it because it's true. Even if she wasn't my daughter, Jason would still be right." He paused, then added firmly, "And all of you know it." The bully's bravado cracked. Their shoulders slumped, their eyes darting to the ground. For the first time, they felt the sting of accountability. Manny turned back to Jason. "Did you know you could get hurt stepping in like that?" Jason nodded. "Yeah, but I didn't want them to hurt her. Someone had to stop them." Those words echoed through the crowd. Parents exchanged glances, realizing how rare it was to see a child so willing to risk himself for another. Some even wiped away tears. Manny smiled gently, placing his other hand on Jason's shoulder. "That's the heart of a champion. Not the punches, not the belts, not the money, but the courage to stand for what's right even when it's hard." Jason's chest swelled with pride. Manny's daughter gave him a small, shy smile. "Thank you, Jason," she whispered. The crowd, sensing the lesson in full bloom, erupted into applause. Not loud, raucous clapping, but steady, respectful applause. Phones continued recording, capturing every second of the encounter. The bullies, embarrassed and overwhelmed, began to retreat. "Come on, let's go," one muttered. They shuffled away, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame. But Manny wasn't done. He called after them. "Wait." The boys stopped, glancing back nervously. "You can choose to keep acting this way or you can be better. The choice is yours. But know this, people will always remember how you made them feel. And today everyone here will remember Jason, not you." The words hit harder than any punch. The bullies lowered their heads and hurried off, disappearing into the crowd. Jason looked at Manny, a question in his eyes. "Did I really do the right thing?" Manny crouched down so he was eye level with him. "Jason, you did the right thing even when it was hard. That's the mark of someone strong. Never forget that." Jason nodded, his small frame brimming with pride he'd never felt before. The park settled again, but the energy was forever changed. Parents whispered to each other. Children stared at Jason with admiration, and Manny's daughter clung tightly to both her father and her new defender. Manny stood tall, looking out at the watching crowd. He knew this moment wasn't just about his daughter or Jason. It was about showing everyone, young and old, that true justice doesn't need fists, only courage. And what he chose to do next would leave the entire park stunned. The park was buzzing now. Parents whispered to each other, some still clapping softly while others whispered in awe at Jason's courage. Manny's daughter held tightly to her father's hand, safe at last, though her eyes never left the boy who had stepped forward when no one else would. Jason, meanwhile, looked around awkwardly. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. For him, this wasn't about glory. It was about doing what was right. But in the crowd, murmurs began to rise. Someone near the swing squinted, then nudged her friend. "Wait a second. Isn't that Manny Pacquiao?" Her friend gasped. "You're right, it is him. That's Manny Pacquiao, the boxer, the senator from the Philippines." The whispers spread like wildfire. One by one, parents, teenagers, and even the kids on the sidelines began to realize who the calm, authoritative man standing beside Jason really was. No way. "Manny Pacquiao here? That's him. I've seen his fights, and he's a legend. He's standing right there teaching those kids about respect." The bullies, who hadn't made it far, turned back as the whispers reached them, their faces drained of color. They had just mocked and sneered in front of a global icon, a man known not only for his fists, but for his leadership and generosity. But Jason? He stood there clueless. He didn't follow boxing. He didn't know about Manny's titles, his championships, or his political role. All he knew was that this man was kind, wise, and strong, the kind of adult who made him feel proud of his decision. Manny noticed the shift in the crowd, the rising energy as recognition spread. But instead of using it, instead of flexing his fame to crush the bullies completely, he stayed humble. He didn't raise his voice to announce who he was. He didn't gloat, because this moment wasn't about Manny Pacquiao, the champion. It was about Jason, the boy who had shown the courage to defend someone when it mattered most. He placed his arm gently around Jason's shoulder and said, "Remember this, what you did today, people will never forget. You stood for justice, and that's something even the strongest men sometimes fail to do." Jason's eyes brightened, though he still didn't fully grasp the weight of Manny's words. He just nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Meanwhile, the whispers grew louder. Some people pulled out their phones, zooming in, recording video after video. The clips weren't just of the confrontation anymore. They were of Manny standing beside Jason, honoring him in front of everyone. The parents closest to the scene began speaking louder now, their whispers turning into open admiration. "That's really him! And he's not showing off, and he's lifting that boy up." A jogger who had stopped earlier pulled out his phone and whispered into it like a commentator. "I'm here at the park, and Manny Pacquiao just witnessed a kid defend his daughter from bullies. You won't believe what's happening." The crowd's respect swelled, but Manny ignored the rising wave of attention. His focus remained on the boy. He could see something of himself in Jason, a child who had nothing to gain but chose courage anyway. It reminded him of the days when he was poor, overlooked, and underestimated. Back then, nobody cared about Manny's name. Nobody thought he'd rise to greatness. But he had learned that even small acts of courage could change the course of life. And now, watching Jason, he knew this moment could change the boy's future forever. The bullies shuffled uncomfortably at the edge of the crowd, hearing the whispers. The ringleader muttered, "That's Manny Pacquiao? For real?" His friends didn't answer. They just lowered their heads in shame. Finally, a parent from the crowd spoke up. "Jason, do you know who's standing with you?" Jason blinked, confused. "No, who?" The crowd chuckled softly, almost disbelieving his innocence. Manny smiled gently and answered before anyone else could. "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is who you chose to be today." The crowd fell silent again. Manny's humility cut through the noise, reminding everyone that fame was meaningless compared to character. Jason looked at him, puzzled, but then nodded. For him, that was enough. The bystanders, however, couldn't contain themselves. Many were already posting online, their captions filled with awe. Manny Pacquiao teaching life lessons at the park. Boy defends Manny's daughter. Pacquiao praises him instead of himself. Strength isn't fists, it's courage. And as the cameras rolled, Manny's calm composure, Jason's innocent bravery, and the bullies' defeated silence painted a scene no one would soon forget. The world didn't know it yet, but this story was about to explode far beyond the park. What Manny chose to do next, in front of everyone, left even the bullies stunned, and the boy's life forever changed. The whispers in the crowd had grown into open amazement. Parents were nudging each other, children were tugging at sleeves, and nearly every phone was raised, recording. The realization had spread fully now. Manny Pacquiao, the world champion, the senator, the philanthropist, was standing in their neighborhood park, but Manny wasn't concerned with the cameras or the attention. His eyes were locked on the small boy beside him, and then on the bullies who lingered at the edge of the crowd, shuffling uncomfortably. He took a step forward, his voice rising not with anger, but with a commanding tone that cut through every murmur. "Listen to me," he said, his accent giving his words even more gravity. "What happened here today is something you all need to remember. Too often, people think strength is about power. They think it's about being bigger, louder, or more feared. But that's a lie." The park fell silent again. Even the kids who hadn't understood the earlier tension now leaned in, captivated. Manny pointed to Jason. "This boy, Jason, he showed you what real strength looks like. He didn't have size, he didn't have numbers, but he had courage. He used his voice, his heart, and his bravery to stand up for someone else. That is true power." The crowd broke into applause, but Manny lifted a hand gently, signaling for silence. He wasn't finished. He turned to the bullies directly. Their faces were red, their eyes darting to the ground, ashamed but unwilling to run. "And you," he said firmly, "you thought hurting someone smaller would make you strong. But it only made you weak. It showed your fear, not your strength. When you mock, when you push, when you try to make others feel less, you're not proving yourself. You're only proving your emptiness." A hush swept across the park. The bullies shifted uncomfortably, but Manny's words weren't laced with cruelty. They were sharp, yes, but they carried the weight of truth. He paused, looking at the circle of onlookers. The world is already full of injustice. Too many people are judged because of the way they look, the color of their skin, or where they come from. That kind of hate starts small, with words, with bullying, with thinking you are better than someone else. But it can grow into something far more dangerous. A parent in the crowd nodded, tears welling in her eyes. The truth of Manny's words resonated deeply. "But we can stop it," Manny continued. "We stop it by teaching our children respect. We stop it by showing them that kindness is stronger than cruelty. We stop it when ordinary people like Jason decide to stand up." Jason's cheeks burned with pride. He didn't fully grasp the scope of Manny's message, but he understood that he had done something right, something bigger than himself. The bullies' leader muttered under his breath, but Manny's sharp gaze silenced him immediately. "Look at Jason," Manny said, gesturing. "He didn't need fame. He didn't need money. He didn't even know who I am. He stood up simply because it was right. That's the kind of strength this world needs." The crowd clapped again, louder this time. Some parents cheered. Others shouted words of support. "Yes, that's right. Teach them, Manny. Manny raised his voice a little more, letting it ring across the park. True champions are not measured by belts or trophies. They are measured by how they treat others. You can win 100 fights in the ring, but if you lose your fight against hate, pride, and cruelty, then you have lost everything. The words struck hard, especially coming from a man whose fists had made him famous worldwide. It wasn't about punching. It was about values. Manny's daughter clung to his side, looking at him with admiration. Jason stood tall, still nervous, but now emboldened by the weight of Manny's affirmation. He had never imagined that one small act, stepping between a girl and her bullies, would turn into this. Manny's voice softened now, though it carried the same power. Jason, today you gave me hope. You reminded me of the boy I used to be, standing against struggles much bigger than myself. And to everyone here, remember this moment. Remember what it looks like when courage defeats cruelty. The crowd erupted into applause once more, this time thunderous, filling the park. Phones captured every second, broadcasting Manny's words to the world before he even left the scene. The bullies, red-faced and humiliated, slowly slunk away, unable to withstand the weight of the lesson. For once their power had been broken, not by fists but by dignity and truth. Manny placed both hands on Jason's shoulders. You are stronger than you know, and one day you'll see how far that kind of strength can take you. Jason smiled shyly, glancing down, but his heart swelled. He wasn't just a boy anymore. In the eyes of everyone watching, he was a symbol of bravery. And though the moment could have ended there, Manny knew there was still more to reveal. Because what came next would change Jason's life forever. When the truth about Manny's identity finally became undeniable, the reaction from Jason and the crowd shocked everyone, especially the bullies. The applause was still echoing when the crowd began pressing in closer. Phones hovered in the air, capturing Manny's every word, every gesture. For some, the lesson itself was enough. For others, the curiosity had become too great to ignore. One father, still clutching his phone, called out, "Jason, do you know who that man is standing beside you?" Jason shook his head. "No. I just know he's kind." The crowd chuckled warmly. Manny smiled at Jason, then looked out across the circle of faces surrounding them. His humility had kept him from saying anything before. But now, with so many watching, the truth was impossible to hold back. A woman near the front spoke up, almost breathless. "That's Manny Pacquiao, the world champion boxer." The senator. Gasps rippled through the park. Parents covered their mouths in disbelief. Children whispered to each other, and even the bullies froze mid-step, their jaws dropping. Jason blinked. "Wait, what? You're the Manny Pacquiao?" Manny crouched down to meet his eyes. His voice was calm, steady, and full of warmth. "Yes, Jason, but today I'm just a father. And today you are the real champion." The crowd erupted again, louder than before. The moment had shifted completely. This was no longer just about a scuffle in the park. It was a living lesson, a collision of fame, humility, and courage. The bullies, red-faced and stunned, tried to melt into the background, but the crowd wouldn't let them. Parents gave them sharp looks, and some even shook their heads in disappointment. The bullies had lost not only the confrontation, but their dignity in front of the entire community. One of the bullies muttered, "We didn't know." Manny turned toward them, his voice stern but not cruel. "It doesn't matter who someone is. It shouldn't take fame to earn respect. Everyone deserves dignity, whether they're a champion in the ring or just a child on the playground." Those words struck harder than any punch. The bullies lowered their heads, shame painted across their faces. For once, they had no comeback, no arrogance to hide behind. Manny looked back at Jason, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't know me, yet you still stood up for my daughter. That makes what you did even more powerful. You didn't act because of who I am. You acted because of who you are." Jason's eyes widened. He felt a lump in his throat, his young heart racing with pride. He had never imagined a world-famous man would say such words to him. The parents around the park applauded again. Many of them had tears in their eyes, moved not only by Manny's humility but by Jason's pure bravery. The videos being recorded captured everything: the bullies' shame, Jason's courage, and Manny's powerful words about justice and respect. Somewhere in the back, a teenager whispered while recording, "This is going viral. The world needs to see this." Manny straightened, his presence towering but never arrogant. "Let this moment be remembered," he said, projecting his voice so all could hear. "True heroes are not always famous. Sometimes they are children who refuse to be silent. Sometimes they are ordinary people who act with extraordinary courage. He paused, letting the words sink in. We must raise our children to be like Jason, not afraid to stand against wrong, no matter the cost. The crowd roared with applause. Some cheered Jason's name. Others shouted respect, over and over again. The energy in the park was electric, a wave of unity and admiration sweeping through everyone present. Jason looked overwhelmed, glancing around at the cheering faces. He wasn't used to attention, and part of him wanted to shrink back. But Manny kept a steady hand on his shoulder, grounding him, reminding him that this moment belonged to him. Manny's daughter stepped forward, her small hands clutching Jason's. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely audible over the noise. "You're my hero." Jason's cheeks turned red, but he smiled shyly. For a boy who had stepped into danger without thinking. This was the kind of reward he'd never imagined. The bullies tried to slip away once more, but a group of parents blocked their path, forcing them to listen. Manny's words hadn't been just for Jason. They had been for them too. And though shame burned their faces, they stayed. Finally, Manny addressed the bullies one last time. "You have a chance to change. You can walk away and stay the same, or you can choose to be better. Remember Jason, remember this day. Decide what kind of people you want to be." The bullies nodded reluctantly, their pride shattered. They turned and left the park, this time without swagger, only silence. The atmosphere shifted again, not heavy with tension anymore, but alive with inspiration. Parents hugged their children tighter, whispering lessons about courage. Kids looked at Jason with wide eyes, some even cheering his name like he was already a champion. And Manny? He stood tall, watching Jason with pride. The boy had unknowingly walked into history. Phones were still rolling, and within hours, the story would race across the internet. Manny Pacquiao's daughter defended by young boy. What Pacquiao did next will inspire you. Millions would see it. Millions would share it, and millions would learn the lesson that unfolded in that small park. But for Manny, the real victory wasn't in the cameras, the applause, or the fame. It was in knowing that his daughter had seen the power of kindness, that Jason had found his courage, and that even the bullies had been forced to confront their actions. He turned to Jason one last time. "Son, the world will remember this day, but I want you to remember one thing. Never lose this courage. It will carry you farther than you can imagine." Jason nodded, his young face glowing with determination. And as the crowd cheered once more, Manny knew this moment was bigger than boxing, bigger than politics. It was about humanity. What happened when the videos hit the internet would stun not just the park, but the entire world. By the time Manny and Jason left the park, the videos were already flooding social media. Parents who had recorded the entire scene uploaded clips to Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. Within hours, hashtags began trending. "You were in real strength," "Jason the hero," "Kars Pacquiao lesson." The clips showed everything. The bullies closing in on Manny's daughter, Jason stepping forward, Manny's calm words, and finally the jaw-dropping reveal that the humble man at the center of it all was none other than Manny Pacquiao. Comment sections exploded with praise. "That boy is a legend already." Manny Pacquiao just proved once again why he's more than a boxer. This is how you teach respect. With dignity, not fists. Within 24 hours, the story had crossed borders. News outlets in the Philippines reported it first, calling Jason a young hero. Soon after, American and European media picked it up. Talk shows discussed it. Celebrities shared the video. Activists pointed to it as a reminder that standing up against injustice isn't about age, race, or status. It's about courage. Jason's name was everywhere. At his school, teachers congratulated him. Kids who once ignored him now looked at him with admiration. But Jason remained humble. When asked why he did it, his answer was always the same: because it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile, Manny himself was approached by reporters asking for comment. His statement was simple yet powerful. Heroes are not always champions in the ring. Sometimes they are ordinary children with extraordinary courage. Jason reminded me, and reminded the world, that respect and justice belong to everyone. No one should ever be judged by how they look, the color of their skin, or where they come from. We are all equal. That message struck deep. Activists, educators, and parents everywhere began sharing the clip, not just as entertainment but as a teaching tool. Schools replayed it in assemblies, using Jason's bravery as an example of anti-bullying courage. Community leaders quoted Manny's words in sermons and speeches. The bullies, who once felt untouchable, now faced consequences. Their parents, embarrassed and ashamed, issued apologies. The school they attended organized workshops on respect and empathy. The incident, which could have been just another cruel day on the playground, became a turning point in how the community talked about fairness and kindness. Jason, however, didn't let the fame go to his head. Manny made sure of that. He invited Jason and his family to his home one evening. Over a simple dinner, Manny told the boy, "The cameras will stop one day, Jason. The likes and shares will fade. But what you carry inside, that courage you showed, it must stay. That is what will define you." Jason nodded, listening intently. For him, Manny wasn't just a world champion anymore. He was a mentor, someone who believed in him. Back online, the story kept spreading. Celebrities commented on it. Teachers shared it in classrooms. Millions around the world typed a single word in the comments: respect. Manny's final social media post about the incident captured hearts everywhere. Alongside a photo of him standing with Jason and his daughter, he wrote, "Strength is not measured by how many people you can knock down. True strength is measured by how many people you can lift up." The post reached millions of likes and shares in just days. But more than numbers, it touched people on a personal level. Parents used it to teach their children kindness. Teenagers discussed it as an example of courage. Adults reflected on their own choices, whether they had stood up against injustice or stayed silent. For Manny, the incident became one of the most meaningful moments of his public life. It wasn't about a title or a fight. It was about passing on a message that mattered far more than boxing ever could: justice, humility, and respect. For Jason, the experience shaped his identity. He no longer doubted himself when facing challenges. He knew now that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing what's right even when fear is there. And for Manny's daughter, the lesson was even more personal. She had seen that kindness and bravery could protect her, even when her father wasn't standing there. She had seen how one boy's decision could turn a painful moment into a story of hope. The world moved on to new headlines, as it always does. But this story never truly faded. People kept sharing it year after year, reminding each other of that afternoon in the park when a child showed more strength than bullies. And a world champion chose to lift him higher instead of taking the spotlight. Even now, those who were there still tell the story. How a little girl was bullied, how a boy named Jason stepped up, and how Manny Pacquiao turned a confrontation into a lesson that touched millions. If you believe no one should ever be judged by appearance, if you believe strength comes from standing for what's right, type respect in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one.